Welcome back. Now, in 2015, 197 countries agreed to pursue efforts in addressing the global climate change crisis under the Paris Climate Agreement. It is the most ambitious climate agreement yet. Now, one of its key points is to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius and have $100 billion in financing from 2020. Where are we 5 years on? Well, joining me in studio for this discussion is the French ambassador to Kenya, Aline Custer-Menager. And joining me virtually are the Italian ambassador to Kenya, Alberto Pieri, the deputy British High Commissioner to Kenya, Mike Foster, and the Vice President of the World Resources Institute, Wanjira Maathai. Thank you all for joining me this morning for this very important discussion. Let me begin with you, Your Excellency Custer-Menager. 5 years on, Paris was the host to this climate agreement. How did this start?
It all started in 1992 with the big Rio conference, where a framework agreement, several framework agreements were taken, one of them being on climate change. Yeah. Then it took 20 years to come to the Paris Agreement. It's a long time, but climate change is a comprehensive issue, difficult one, where global action is absolutely needed because no country can tackle it individually. It took 20 years. We had a failure in Copenhagen because probably the method was not the right one, and it took time to really agree on common goals, common means to fight climate change, and also to take all the countries together to act on climate change. And in that respect, science was key. And the scientists have well documented climate change globally. A group of scientists from all over the world, including Kenya, through the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, have documented all the scientific research and have proved that climate change is a fact. We are already at 1 degree over the level of temperature that used to be the one during pre-industrial time. And if we don't act, we will be at 3 or 4 degrees over this level by the end of the era. So the Paris Agreement is a universal agreement, almost universal, as you mentioned. It has been ratified very quickly. Within a year, the ratification happened, showing the will of the international community to act. And it set the path for the action, but it was not the end of the negotiation, if I may say. More needs to be done. First, the rule of implementation, which are so important for the agreement to be effective, had to be adopted. To put transparency, to put method in measuring the commitment of the member states. It happened in COP24 in Poland. And COP26 is a key moment because this is the moment where the countries have to renew the commitment they made in Paris. So it's very important. It's a test year for the agreement. And we are quite optimistic, but we have to push together.
Indeed. And you mentioned common goals. What were some of the key points that were agreed upon?
I would say there are 3 pillars and 3 key points in this agreement to make it simple because it's a more complex agreement indeed. The first one is agree on the level of temperature we want to, the limit to be. And as you mentioned, it's 2 degrees. This 2 degree goal is key. And the exact formulation is to the international community through this agreement committed itself to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees and even to pursue efforts to limit the rise to 1.5 degrees. We all know that over 2 degrees the consequences are too many, too heavy to be really addressed. And 2 degrees seem to be the right goal temperature to achieve in order to be able to manage the situation. But indeed, in some countries, the climate change is much more damaging, and it's an average. So, for example, in certain parts of Africa where the arid areas are, the level of temperature will increase more. And for the small island also, it's a vital issue. So that's why also this goal of 1.5 degrees was also included in the agreement. It was a key moment of the negotiation to agree on this. Second pillar is on adaptation, building resilience, and supporting the countries who have to make effort to do so, including the developing countries. And the third pillar is about money. It's to mobilize the flow of money to invest in these low carbon emission economies, on resilience, and so on.
Let me bring you in, Ambassador Pieri. When it comes to the state of the climate crisis around the world, from where you sit, what do you feel are the most pressing issues?
Well, let me quote some data from a recent report from FAO and the World Organization. According to FAO, in the last 20 years, water has been reduced of 20% all around the world. This affects 1.5 billion people, particularly in areas such as Africa and Asia. So water scarcity is one of the main challenges. But let me draw your attention on the World Meteorological Organization. Of course, thanks to the lockdown, there has been a reduction in the of this year in April of 70% of emissions, CO2 emissions. But with the recovery following these first months, the emissions increase again. And despite the fact that the economic crisis due to the COVID emergency has generated very heavy effects on the economy, on jobs and so on, emissions, the effect of the emission has been almost negligible. So what does it mean? That we need to take strong measures, and in particular we have to be very, very committed in order to change, to reverse this trend. Because there has been some good news. There has been a reduction of CO2 emissions since 1990, but for example, of 24% from that year, but it's still very low compared with the target that we need to achieve. That is, for example, the European Union set this target in 50% less of emission compared with the 1990 by the end of 2050.
And let me bring in the Deputy British High Commissioner, Mike Foster, in on that. We've seen a reduction in carbon emissions since 1990. And one of the key points out of the agreement was to see more countries move away from fossil fuels. How is that being done in the practical sense?
Thanks, Victoria. So this is actually an area I think where Kenya can be really proud of the leadership it's shown. So President Kenyatta committed to 100% renewable energy by 2030. The country's well on the way to delivering it. It's done that with support from, amongst others, the UK government and UK businesses. We financed new solar, geothermal and wind power. That includes the Lake Turkana wind farm, which provides now 17% of Kenya's energy. So altogether, you're talking about almost 90% of the energy in Kenya coming from renewable sources into the grid. And that demonstrates real leadership by Kenya, I think.
And I have to bring in Ambassador Pieri, as much as that is a good thing to get them off fossil fuels, when you look at the alternatives like renewable energy or sustainable energy, it's many times, expensive, more expensive than fossil fuels. So it's difficult to ask countries to make the shift when the expenses are just out of reach. How is that being done in terms of encouraging them to take on renewable energy as an alternative?
Well, actually, thanks to investment and research and development, the cost of renewable energies has decreased substantially in the last 20 years. Let me quote some figures very interesting. That since 2010, the cost of producing electricity from solar wind has decreased, respectively, by 73% and 23%. And also in Kenya, making the cost, for example, to produce wind and electricity from wind energies has decreased dramatically. What does it mean? That we don't need anymore almost policy or incentives, financial incentives to develop renewable energy. Of course, we need investments, we need sustainable finance, we need to continue to research and develop an investment that is improve the technology. Now the new wind plants are much more efficient in terms of energy than 20 years ago. So in some cases, renewable energy are already more competitive than fuel fossil. Why? Because we invested, the world has invested to continue on this path through technology, through also financial tools in order to pave the way to further investments of renewable energy. And for example, Kenya gives us an example, a perfect example. It's a country which has enormous resources in renewable energy, for example, geothermal, but also wind and solar. And actually, its production of electricity from renewable energy, I think it's around 80–90%. So this is what does mean that it's possible to change. It's possible to go to an energy transition, and it's possible to go toward the decarbonization.
Ambassador Kuster Menege, let me bring you in here, because as much as the Paris Climate Agreement is a legal document, there's some aspects of it that aren't legally binding. And so the question has always been, how do you ensure that the countries that adopted this do keep their pledges if there haven't been mechanisms put in place to maybe punish those that don't meet some of those requirements? But what happens when it comes to monitoring and ensuring that they keep to their pledges?
Thank you, Victoria. It's indeed a key question, because the aim of this agreement is to be effective and to be able to measure the commitments, the realization, the implementation of the commitments. And it's when it comes to climate change, it's very complex issues. You have to take into account diverse factors. So I would say it's both a very political issue, and the agreement is political, and also a very technical one with a number of experts working on it on a day-to-day basis. As I explained, a key moment was the adoption of the rules of implementation in Poland. There's still progress to make, because part of it and the issue of the carbon market was not really tackled, was not able to have a result on this one, which is important, because when you speak of the price of the energy, you have to put a price on the carbon emission, because it has a cost for the global economy, for the world, and it's a key area where we have to push to be able to make the renewable energy competitive. When it comes to this agreement, I would say it's a new type of agreement. The key issue is that there is no binding figures for each country, like was the case in the Kyoto Protocol for the developed countries, but it's a flexible one, leaving to the countries the measure of their ambition, but putting a big push on the ambition, because it's a progressive dynamic agreement which requires the countries every 5 years to update their commitment on their limitation of their greenhouse gases emission. That's where we are. We are 5 years from Paris, and we do hope that all the countries that have committed to the agreement will put new and more ambitious contributions, which is called the NDC, National Determined Contributions, to the level of emission they want to commit on. And how can it be measured? But they will there are some framework to really document the commitment. There will be reports. Indeed, we are in the international world. We have no tribunal. We have no jails. We have no fines, and we will have to be confident and I think the big countries, they make a point in being being faithful to the agreement. It's an issue of image and of credibility. It has become a global issue, and we do hope that the commitment will be followed. And indeed, the experts are working to tighten the framework and make it as serious as possible for it to be implemented. But the key point is, at the moment, the commitments. Yeah. And at the moment, we have around 100 countries that have shown that they will be able to put some more ambitious commitment at the Glasgow meeting. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's 1/4 almost of the emission around the world, so it's not enough to achieve a result. This is a key point. Indeed, at some point, we will have to have this verification, but the key point is to commit, to be more ambitious, to put the right policies to make it effective, and also to put the right framework to control the whole process.
You know, Wanjira Maathai joins us over the phone now. Wanjira, when you look at this document, and as Ambassador Cousteau-Ménager said, you know, it's more of a political document, so it's based on political will or peer pressure for many of the countries to actually adhere to the commitments made. When you're looking at where we are 5 years on, how are we faring? You know, considering that there's no penalties, there's no tribunal to take any countries that probably disobeyed. How do we look at our progress so far, 5 years on?
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, everybody. Sorry, I was struggling to get on, but absolutely. I think listening in and the progress that has been made since Paris is obviously significant. We have to say that things have been done. But the reality is we are just not moving fast enough. We're not going to meet the Paris target if we continue as we're going. And in the major sectors, right, the major emitters, as we've heard from the ambassador, ambition is a critical part of that. And it's just the ambition is not there yet, especially from the largest emitters. And so to your question, not that well. We have to do much more. A recent report from my organization, WRI and Climate Works, showed that we've got to move far faster in significant sectors. I think it was 7 times as fast on transportation, on energy transition. So there's a lot of work to be done in the next 10 years. And ambition is a very big part of that, and especially from the major emitters.
And just to ask for clarification purposes, what are the major emitters?
Well, you have countries in the global north. You have the United States, so hopefully we see some good movement in the next few years around their climate ambitions. We saw some very good news during the New York Climate Week from China, and so we, as interested in climate activity, we want to see what that really means in paper. But there are some commitments coming out that are ambitious enough in words, but let's see how they actually pan out. But we have to see those actions translated into the sectors of transportation, for example, into the sectors of energy. Because, for example, if you make an ambitious commitment and then continue to invest in coal, then, of course, it erases the very ambition you're projecting. Europe, as a bloc, looking to make some very ambitious targets. But we'll see. Before the end of the year, ambition is the word of this next decade.
Certainly. And Deputy High Commissioner Mike Foster, one of the commitments was to cut carbon emissions. We've heard from Wanjira that we're just not moving fast enough. So how do we dial up efforts to ensure that we get at least close to some of those goals?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. So maybe I could talk a little bit about what we've done at home in the UK, where we've made some really significant steps, I think, to reduce emissions. So I think the first thing is that we've made a legal commitment to get down to net zero emissions by 2050. And then last week, actually, the British Prime Minister announced a new 10-point plan for how we'll deliver that transformation to a green economy. That's going to be a £12 billion investment, but we think it's going to create about 250,000 jobs at home in the UK. So it includes major investments in energy efficient buildings, in offshore wind, and nature-based solutions like forests. It also includes ending the sale of all petrol and diesel sort of cars and other vehicles by 2050. So that's just 10 years away. So there's some really major steps we're taking to reduce emissions at home in the UK, but we're really excited about partnering with Kenya to try and achieve the same here.
And Ambassador Pieri, one of the issues, the things that we need to get to these goals is money. There's a $100 billion commitment, at least to start from this year, 2020, up until 2025. So what will a lot of that money go to? And much of this commitment is coming from, quote unquote, the rich countries. Have we come close to that commitment of that kind of financing, or are we still a ways away from it?
Well, of course, we are aware, for example, talking about G20, the 20 country member of this organization contribute for more than 80% of the emissions all around the world. So there is a responsibility. And of course, the financial side is crucial in order to mobilize resources oriented to in green economy, green investments. I think there are some, we are not still at this step that we want in terms of mobilization, but I think there are some good trends that I would like to emphasize. For example, the European Bank for Investment decide not to invest anymore in fuel fossils projects, but just in a renewable project. So we have to move to another way to invest, to mobilize finance, for example, and towards green investments. And this is start to take. Start to be implemented, but not, of course, at the rate that we would like to see. But I think also in this case, the right word, as Wajira what mentioned, is ambitious. We must also ambitious in mobilizing financial resources. We must to pave the way for facilitate investments on green energies, also through financial tools, and for regulatory provision and so on. For sure, what I want to say that the green recovery, I mean, looking at the current COVID crisis, we believe that the recovery can be implemented through green policies. I mean, investing in green economy. This will mobilize jobs and create the conditions also for producing more resources to invest in green and in energy transition.
Wandira, Ambassador Pieri talked about green investments, green policies, green jobs, if you will. When we're looking at the Kenya case, where do those opportunities lie that we can start kind of taking advantage of?
Really great question. The main opportunities, I believe, lie in the energy sector, so the renewable sector. Fortunately, in Kenya, our energy grid or our energy mix is largely green. So we have some of the greenest energy mixes ever. But we are beginning to see policy interest and direction in sources of energy like coal. That is moving in the wrong direction. We have to continue to invest in opportunities of renewables and explore some of the new technologies that are coming down the pipe. But transportation is one of the biggest opportunities across the globe, and even for countries like ours. It's one where, if you look at urbanization across the African continent, happening faster than anywhere else in the world. But what are we doing? We're building superhighways. We're investing in very exclusive infrastructure, not inclusive. And what do I mean by that? We need to invest in infrastructure that allows more people to ride bikes, to walk safely. So those are some of the green investments. Those are some of the green infrastructure we have to put in place. But it needs to be directly signaled so that investments coming into countries like Kenya get the signal from the government, from the highest level, that if you're going to invest in infrastructure in Kenya, this is the sort of infrastructure we want to see. Many countries around the world are cutting all of these cement-heavy, very emission-heavy infrastructure. We're supposed to be investing in moving people, not moving vehicles, because that's where the emissions are coming from. Even though we're not big emitters, we will suffer some of the most impacts, the negative impacts of climate. So investing in transportation, investing in renewable energy, and looking into public transportation, so we move more people in more efficient ways. That would really make a huge difference for countries like ours.
All right, on that note, let's take a short break here on Daybreak. Much more ahead in this discussion on the Paris Climate Agreement. 5 years on, a lot learned in terms of what we can do. We're still not moving fast enough, and more commitment, at least politically, from the member states of that agreement. We'll be talking about the future. Where do we go from here? Stay with us. We'll be back.